Tonight, I'm thrilled to have with us Mikki Kendall here in the Rare Book Room to discuss Amazons, Abolitionists, and Activists, a graphic history for women's fight for their rights. Her brand new history of the fights throughout history for abolition, suffrage, labor rights, civil rights, LGBTQ liberation, reproductive rights, and more. Mikki is a historian and diversity consultant whose work can be found in The Guardian, The Washington Post, Essence, Salon, and many other publications. She's appeared on BBC, NPR, and elsewhere. Joining her to discuss her work is the Nebula, Locus, and first ever thrice consecutive Hugo Award-winning author, NK Jemisin. She currently writes for the New York Times Book Review and taught at Claren and Claren West writing workshops. Her latest novel, The City We Became, is out in March of next year. Please join me in welcoming them both to the Strand.
In true me fashion, I am absolutely tweeting what Nora said about this is the sound of my butt. Give me 1 second.
Really? You're doing this as we speak?
Yes, I am.
Oh my God. All right. So Mikki and I are friends, and I have had to deal with all of this for years now, all this behavior. Anyway, but I am thrilled and honored to be helping you debut your first published, your first published graphic novel, but of course you have another book coming out soon too, don't you?
Yes, in February, I have Hood Feminism coming out from Viking. And so I decided for some foolish reason to put 2 books out in less than 6 months. Choices were made. None of them were good. Nora has on her I told you so pants right now. I'm not looking at her and the I told you so face I know she is giving me.
Yep.
No, I refuse. Rude.
I didn't say anything. I'm just looking at you.
The face says so many things.
All right. All right. Now, you have put out this wonderful book. I am a giant fan of it. I have given my advance copy already to one of my nieces, and I have talked to her about all of the things that she's starting to have really good questions about in this book. So do you want to give a sort of brief description of the book to people, or how do you want to start this?
So a quick in and out is that it is a book full both of the history that we know and the history that we don't know, and the history that we think we know and we're wrong about. Because generally speaking, especially when you're talking about history and women, whatever you think you know is wrong. Mm-hmm. Even what you do know is incomplete. Mm-hmm. So I tried to sort of close some gaps in a quick and easy way. I don't at all think this is a comprehensive guide to everything that ever happened. It is, however, I think a good place to start. And it gives you a handy-dandy index at the rear so that when you're like, who is this person? The magic of the Google and the Wikipedia can come in, if nothing else. These events, all of these things. One of the really interesting things so far has been how many people have said, I didn't know about that person. Mm. And it's like, I probably didn't either before I started working on this book. Mm-hmm. So. Mm-hmm.
I think of a good pairing with this book as, I don't know if you ever read Cameron Hurley's essay, We Have Always Fought.
Yes,
which is, it's a fantastic essay where she's kind of addressing, the idea that it's impossible for women to be warriors or fighters, and that women have not been present in every possible war in human history. And you're tackling that as well in a couple of places in this book.
The image is on the screen right now.
Yes, well, let's
go
back up and, thank you.
Hold on, I don't remember how. There we go.
Got it, excellent. That's not the war one. Oh, yes, it is.
Yes.
Okay. I actually really love this. We were going to talk about that in a minute, but I guess we'll go ahead and talk about these now. All right. So
are you going to talk about my Easter eggs?
Your what?
The Easter eggs.
The Easter eggs. Yes, I love the number of little cameos that are in here. Now, is there a pointy thing on this? Is there a pointer here with this? Let's find out. No. What did I do? There we go. No, that is not a pointer. All right, well. Okay. We're not going to touch this anymore. And I'm going to point you into sort of the top right quadrant where you will see a very familiar, Seriously?
You had to go back, baby.
I did.
Not forward.
I'm trying. All right. Okay. Are you willing to be Vanna White for today?
Yes.
Okay.
Take the pointer from her, please, dear God.
I didn't touch it. I just did that. So where do you see Wonder Woman? Right. All right. Also, we've got Merida from. Oh no, it's hard to see. She's off the screen. Let's see. We've got a few other very famous figures who I suspect are Boudica, and I thought I saw Xena in there at one point. There's other Amazons. Yes. Where is Xena?
I'm not sure if you can totally see Xena in this angle. She's in amongst the Amazons fighting.
Oh, okay, yeah. The complete art is not visible here. But, I love the fact that the artist slipped those in. Was that intentional? Did you ask for that?
Yes. So one of the things I love, so first of all, I'm going to confess here that I am an adult who still thinks that Where's Waldo was a great concept. Not as diverse in execution as it could have been, but I like the concept. I also liked Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego. So I love Easter eggs. Easter eggs are one of my favorite things. And so when we were working on this and we were trying to do the big battle scene, it was like, well, how many Easter eggs down through time can we kind of wedge in at this point? And so there's a few Easter eggs scattered around the book. Mm-hmm. You may notice some. Mm-hmm. You may see some familiar faces towards the end.
Mm-hmm. I love that because my niece immediately opened up the book to that page, and the first thing she saw was Wonder Woman. And that was when I noticed it, because I had just sort of read it. I'd been focused on like the text and the knowledge and the information, but she immediately focused on the potential fun of the thing. And for her, then it became a hunt. And she was texting me like throughout the day, Auntie Nora, I found blah, blah, blah. So some of the characters she didn't know or didn't recognize, but when I looked through it again, I saw them, and that made it a lot more fun.
Well, one of the things I think is important when we're talking about history, so the way we teach history is really kind of boring for K through 12. Like, you don't get to do cool history till college, right? And then it's all like fascinating. It's the story of humanity. But I think we all learned like the Battle of Hastings in 1066, and we have no idea what the Battle of Hastings was or why we know that. We learned it for a test, and then we remember it, and that detail means nothing to us, right? Or whatever the detail is, right? And so
the context.
Right. The context is gone. The story is gone. And you think history is boring. And so I wanted this to be something people would want to come back to, that they would enjoy reading. Because I remember being miserable in history and social studies. And then I took it in college from a really great professor named Kevin Hale at Parkland College in Champaign, Illinois. And this was a fascinating class. It was a required class. But it's literally when I was like, I want to major in history. I want to learn all the other cool stuff. Why didn't I learn any of this stuff? Right? But we kind of teach it by rote, and we teach literally in the most boring format ever possible. Oh my God.
Yeah. I never liked history in school. And I got an AP credit for it, so I never had to take it in college. I did that so I wouldn't have to take it in college. So I did all of my memorization in high school, spit it all back, and then ignored history for a while because I didn't think that it was something that I could engage with. And then I started reading like popular histories, things like 1491, New Revelations of the Americas Before Columbus by Charles Mann, things like that, and discovered some really interesting stuff about it. But if I had been engaged way before that, if I had been engaged as a young person, I think I would have been able to pay a lot more attention and sort of understood things from the context more. So I love that you've got the context here.
Well, and one of the other things is that girls don't really get to see much of themselves. They don't just see that they fought. They don't see that they created. They don't see that they made the art. They don't see, sometimes for Women's History Month in a very special segment, right? It's kind of like the Black History Month problem where you've got like 28 days. And I think we learn Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks every year for that 28 days, right? We don't get to anyone else. And then for Women's History Month, if you get the 28 days, it's a miracle. It's more like one project, pick a woman, and sometimes they give you a pre-chosen list with like 12 names or 26 names or whatever. So every kid in the class is writing about a different one on that list of 26 every year, right?
Until like 18 of those 26 names are all the suffragettes. So
yes, and they're all the white suffragettes, and then we really don't talk about anything else, right? So you also have people who think that feminism started with the suffrage movement, and it's like, well, no. Women existed before that point. And I know you think like slavery ended and then black people were reinvented in time for the March on Washington. But also, let's talk about Ida B. Wells. Let's talk about all of the history that happened in between. And also, let's go back to the Haudenosaunee and the fact that the rights European white women didn't have, other people had, right? And we can go as far back to look at like how divorce becomes a right, right? And the murders that became the path to divorce becoming a right, because at one point it was better to be a widow than a wife. And so a lot of women had to figure it out. And you can go back to Rome with this. There are literally a lot of women who decided that very helpfully, he's not nice and I can inherit everything.
And poison is a thing.
I mean, Foxglove and Digitalis are real close cousins. So you can send someone on down that merry road quietly.
I think you started with ancient Sumer here?
Yes.
Okay.
I actually have a little art from before then, because even, so fun fact, you know all those cave paintings that we saw all the time growing up? We learned them and we don't learn who made them. And for a long time they said it was the men. So who was in the cave? Whose
Who had
hands were
time.
small enough to make those
Right.
detailed tiny legs, right? Who had the time? It mostly wasn't men, right?
Yeah.
And so there were a lot of sculptures. There's several of the early Venus sculptures, and they kept saying they were fertility figures because they were so round. You know what that looks like actually? If you look down yourself, that's the view, not looking at someone. And so I started back there because the erasure of women from the world and their impact starts back there. We know what we know about prehistory because women painted it. They sculpted it, right? The Amazons. One of the reasons I wanted to include Wonder Woman in the fictional character, they found the Amazons. They found the Amazons a long time ago. They knew they were real. They just decided they were men. They were buried with weapons, so they must be men. We thought that all the Vikings that set sail were men because they were buried with weapons. They must be men. Anthropology would like to have a word with archaeology. And I would just want to point out that if a forensic anthropologist starts talking to you about archaeologists and pelvises, leave. Just do yourself a favor, especially if an archaeologist argues against the need for body identification and measurements. I've been in that room. Turn around, ease out. You didn't see what happened. You don't know where that body went. He clearly went home. That's it. Trust me.
Okay. So let's look at some pictures. Why don't we do that? Okay. So there were a couple of things in here that I wanted to point out, and you've got some additional ones that
Well,
it
those are
looks
source
like.
picks. A lot of those are kind of where the things came from.
Okay, let's back that up. No, back it up. No. There we go. Okay. Are you holding? Okay, I think it's holding. All right. So why don't you tell us a little bit about this one? Seriously?
It's you. It doesn't like you.
It doesn't like me. I didn't touch it. Okay. So yeah, let's talk more about this one.
So one of the things, we have the entire Prohibition period and the flappers and all of that are sort of happening. The temperance movement predates all of this. It just goes on and on and on, right? And we bust up bars with axes. We do a lot of things. And then meanwhile, the flappers come in post-suffrage, and it's the first time women have some control again over what they're wearing, where they're going. But depending upon what you've seen, you might think that the 20s happened for white people and only white people. I don't know how many of you have seen like Great Gatsby, that kind of stuff. Like there's an entire aesthetic, right? Fun fact, their dresses, their outfits, that whole look was largely based on what young black women were wearing and other young women of color. Part of what made it so racy was, in fact, that they looked less like respectable white women with the giant. I don't know if many of you have seen that image right before this, where they're wearing like the giant hair and the big hats and the very tight dresses, the long skirts. There's a weird period where women are covered from here all the way down, and then the rebellion post World War I is this. And part of it is fabric costs. Part of it, though, is that because they've been working, you can't wear an ankle-length dress into a factory or any other business, right? Shop girls really couldn't be dressed like the ladies they were serving. So hemlines start to creep up. And it was supposed to be very daring because before this, your ankle being exposed was supposed to be bad, except women who didn't have money had always had more of them exposed. Women who were not ladies of stature, so forth, so on, right? So that's why you have, like, right down here in the corner, you see what she's wearing? That's what they were supposed to be willing to wear, right? And young women sort of rebelled. Like, if we've got the right to vote and we've got the right to make decisions, I'm not going to keep burying myself in 90-degree weather in 48 pounds of clothing, right? The fainting couch is not appealing. Also, by this point, we had begun to figure out that being all closed up with the arsenic wallpaper was killing us. We had begun to work that out.
There was one other thing I wanted to point out here, which I wish this thing had a pointer. You can see in the last, next to last dialogue bubble in the panel here, the character is asking, did anyone who wasn't rich and white get to do anything cool in the 20s? And then the response is, of course. And then it's a nice segue into talking about the Harlem Renaissance, which isn't included here, but you have to buy the book for that. But
no, the next page is the Harlem Renaissance shot.
Is it?
Yes.
Oh.
I love
Okay.
her. She's my friend.
I suggested certain pages. I didn't include this one. I didn't know it was there. Okay. But so here we go.
Cute.
Really?
She's so cute. Technology is not her friend, but she's so cute.
Just trying to make sure it's going to stay. Okay, good. Let's hope so. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Yes. But that's a nice segue. And one of the things I really liked about the way that you handled that panel, and one of the ways in which I think that you handled sort of disseminating information throughout the story, is that you've got this almost sort of anticipated call and response going on, where you figured out like what kinds of questions, what the skepticism is going to be, and you're addressing that directly. You're not letting them spend time kind of thinking up, oh, well, this can't be real because, there were, we know that there weren't any black people in the 20s, or what it, I know. But you know that some of that thought is developing in the back of their heads, and you call that out, and you have a discussion with those sort of latent thoughts. So how did you come up with the questions that you think your target audience is going to be asking? Like, did you have any guinea pig kids that you ran this past?
I gave birth to two. Who have no options about reading mom's work.
Oh, no.
Listen, I feed them. And if you've ever seen my kids, you understand that the food in the shoe budget for 2 6-foot-tall people means they owe me. You can't be 13 and wear a man's 11 and be 6 feet tall and not owe me. No, sorry. Random mom segue. And so I would ask them, but also, interestingly enough, many of the things were not things kids had said. Adults had said. Do you remember Agent Carter, the show? Yeah. So one of my criticisms of Agent Carter was I had an entire hashtag, Diversify Agent Carter, because I like to make hashtags about things. But one of the reasons I had that hashtag was because people said, well, there wouldn't have been any black people in New York in the 40s. And I want you to understand that there was a moment in my house where I probably looked like when Max Headroom, if any of you remembers Max Headroom, when he broke, that was my entire self for a second, because I was like, there were no black people in New York.
I remember people pulling and they wouldn't have been in a government service because no, that was specifically one of the avenues through which people started to desegregate, and which some of the black folks in the 20s were able to make that transition into the middle class because they could get jobs in the public sector.
Not only were they making the transition, but several were actually leading figures in the federal government, right? They were their whole departments. Yeah. So it was a very peculiar thing because literally some of the first federal agents for the FBI and other agencies were of color, people of color, both in New York and in LA, and also in Chicago, which is a separate thing. The Untouchables is kind of right, but also super wrong. Sorry. I have peeves. And so, I wanted to address the fact that you were going to have people, depending upon what media you've consumed, we all think that what we know about history looks this way in part because of the movies we watch, right? So you watch movies made during Jim Crow for a Jim Crow audience. You watch TV shows made during Jim Crow, right? So then you have people who believe that they know what the 20s looked like because the images aren't there. They know what the 40s looked like. They know what the 50s. People believe Donna Reed is real, and I wanted to kind of push back against that.
Did you want to talk about this one before I move on?
Oh, I just wanted to say, yes, really quickly, one of the reasons I did it as a single setting with all of these people was because I also wanted to convey the idea that these things were happening at the same time. That these people weren't, we sort of teach history in a way that makes you think, like, Martin Luther King is completely displaced from Anne Frank, even though they were born in the same year, right? They would have been active in the world at the same moments, except we don't think of it that way because we don't get to see it that way. So I kind of wanted to show, like, all of these people's lives intersected, their work intersected. There was an entire community happening in Harlem, and not just in Harlem. There was Chicago and some other places, but I picked the Renaissance for this because those were most of them were congregating at that point.
Okay. I'm going to try to move on. Let's see what happens. Oh, okay.
Yes.
I did like this one. It's going to go forward. I'm going to try and back it up. We will see if it works. But okay, I did pick this one. There we go. That should actually stall it. If I did it right, that should theoretically stall it. We will see. But I picked this one to talk about because just of the sheer amount of detail that's involved here, and since I'm just now kind of moving into the comic book world myself, and I'm just now kind of understanding just how much work is involved in that. I just had nothing but admiration for your artist and the sheer amount of detail that she put into this. These are not faceless figures. There are individual transactions going on in the background of this. She spent a lot of time on this.
Hand drew every single image you see.
I just wanted you to talk about that.
So Astrid D'Amico, who is the artist on this, is 24, I want to say, 23, 24, very young. Unbelievably talented. I worked with them on a book about Rapunzel as a monster because, long story, weird brain, me. Rapunzel eats people. Thank you.
Okay. That doesn't surprise me at all, but okay.
Yeah. And so backgrounds sometimes in comics are where a lot of really cool stuff can happen, right? And also, again, we tend to think of the ancient past as like a caveman dragging someone by the hair or whatever. And we don't really understand that the pyramids, the ziggurats, all of these things, people live there. Entire communities were engaging in trade, all of these things. And so we wanted to show that there's a lot of references, that there's an entire Slack channel full of references. I know people's criticism has been that we didn't include the list of references in the back of the book. That's another 30 pages.
Yeah. And this is a book aimed at kids.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Well, I mean, they can look up the references too.
Well,
so.
that's why the index is there, to make it easier for them to look it up. But like, I don't necessarily know that you want to see all of my Library of Congress thoughts. I'm pretty sure you don't. But we wanted to show like this thriving, healthy cities. We tend to think of cities as a more recent invention, but no, all of the world was happening. Nothing new is under the sun is literally a saying for a reason. So then if you go forward to the Queen's one, keep going. Right. Okay. So this one,
forward, I have to wait until it goes forward and then I catch it. Sorry.
I mean,
I don't know if it's going to go. There we go.
Yep.
Yeah, that should hold it.
Yeah. So if you go forward, I wanted to show them.
Go forward again?
No, I'm saying.
Oh.
No, stop. To the queens from Sumeria. If you go forward to this point.
All right.
No, you stop right here. You don't touch
This is
anything. Right.
This is what you want. Okay,
Yes,
good.
I'm just saying words.
Okay.
Don't touch nothing.
All right. I'm leaving it alone.
So many things.
I'm used to being able to control this stuff, so this is a whole other thing.
Yeah.
But all right, okay.
So one of the things too, so fun fact, if you think of the 15th century or whenever as white, you are thinking of it because you never looked at what they're wearing. And you're also not looking at the impact of the trade that is being described on other places, right? So we don't actually have a point where they don't, imperialism is not, we thought we were really civilizing them. It was a retroactive, we have made this excuse for the conquering that we were already going to do, right? So what ends up happening, when you look at a Queen Elizabeth picture, you're actually looking at Elizabeth dressed in, heated with, things that came from somewhere else, from brown people in various places. The satins, the silks, the brocades, all of this, even the lace tatting, the intricacy of some of the lace patterns might well have come from a different culture, right? And you don't really realize, but the clothes that they are wearing are a tapestry of the trade that was already happening, of the interactions that were already happening. If you see, when you write, if you read fantasy and there's that like warm braziers, ermine robes, silk, ermine trimmed silk robes. Well, that's China, that's Finland. Those braziers came from somewhere in the Middle East. The sand to make that glass came from, you're going through the technology, the math, all of this. And so one of the things I also wanted to show was that everybody was happening at the same time. Everybody's communities, their development, no one was uncivilized. They had created cultures that fit where they were. So, you're not going to see these people in a warm climate dressed like those people in the frozen north. That doesn't mean that Africa was uncivilized. They didn't need these things. And they originally traded as equals, right? It's not until later when slavery and other things are coming in, this is where they begin to try to treat them as unequal. And her people step up to support them. And they're able at first to sort of buy time, to remain free, to try to figure out a plan. They didn't have the numbers, but the world could have shifted a different way with a different disease profile, right? That was really the only difference, right? When you talk about the conquering of the Americas or the colonization of the Americas, what's sort of left out of our records, it wasn't this empty place. They'd had 2 massive plagues back to back, and the population hadn't had time to rebound in the Americas. Africa had also had some plague situations come through, and they had not had time to rebound. Had they invaded the 1100s for around, the Black Death, 1400s, we might be looking at a different shaped world.
There are some fantasy novels about that. But anyway, and I love the parallelism that you've got going on here. That was deliberate, obviously, but I mean, it's just, it suggests, even without reading the text, even without the explanation that you just gave, you've done a great job of kind of framing the similarity of what we're looking at here. So, all right, let's look at the next one.
Uh-oh.
I know. It's going to go on, and then I have to wait for it to back up. This is a whole thing. Okay. Yeah, I tried that. That didn't work. That's how we ended up.
It's not getting along with her. It's getting
continuing
along with
to
everyone
go.
but her.
Okay, so one of the things I actually really liked about this one was just the sheer amount of text that you're conveying in this segment. And again, as somebody who is now just getting used to the comics format, the temptation to fill every panel with text is always a thing that you have to be aware of. But when you genuinely have to convey a lot of text, how do you frame it in such a way that it's not like immediately visually off-putting? So do you want to talk about that here?
So one of the reasons, I have an entire pet peeve about the rewriting and reframing of Sojourner Truth's language and history.
Maybe not everybody knows about that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
The Sojourner Truth, the Ain't I a Woman speech is complete and total horseshit. Frances Gage literally gives her a Southern accent and removes all of the verbiage that she actually used years later. Sojourner Truth was enslaved by Dutch people. Her first language was Dutch. She spoke perfectly fluent English. Many of the things that you think she would have said in this Southern accent, she simply would not, because she was never enslaved in the South. She was enslaved in New York. Okay? Important thing.
The stereotype at the time was that black women all spoke like I ain't and can't and so on. Like they all spoke like Southern black people.
Well, not even like Southern black people, because Southern black people didn't necessarily speak like that.
That's true.
But they spoke like that when they were talking to white slave owners as part of a protective mask of ignorance, because if you think I'm too stupid, it's one of the reasons Harriet Tubman is so effective. They never realized Harriet Tubman was as intelligent or as capable as she was, because they thought, for foolish reasons, she blended into the background. That's why she was an effective spy, right? And so for Sojourner Truth, one of the reasons I wanted to put the entire text of her speech in here, you learn Ain't I a Woman? You don't learn what she actually said, even though it was recorded at the time. And we wanted to frame it so that you could see both the progression of her life, but also that she had fought very hard and had educated herself at a time when she wasn't supposed to be educated, and was an erudite, eloquent speaker, and was very effective, both in the fight for freedom and later for women's rights.
Okay. Now let's see if we can get this to actually hold still for the next one. In a minute, it's going to go forward. I have to back it up. There we go. All right. Oh, seriously? Okay, that's my vengeance. Revenge. Okay, so one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about this one was because, again, the sheer amount of detail that your artist put into this is really stunning to me. She put in layers and framing and patterns and so forth. And I'm fascinated by her decision to do that when it must have slowed down production time. But, I mean, not production time, but just sort of in general, it must have made it that much harder to get things done on time. So that said, it's so visually arresting. It makes you want to stop and really kind of absorb that image. And this is also a great way to put in a segment where you've got lots of text. Because when you're stopping to absorb an image, of course your temptation then is to read the text that goes along with it. So did you plan it that way with your script, that you had larger chunks of text and you're like, get elaborate with this image, or did she just kind of instinctively know to do that?
We had a conversation about how we wanted the book to be pretty, and one of the things was that generally the books that are aimed in this market, aimed at kids, that are about, and this book is sort of aimed at all ages, but the ones that are aimed at kids are often sort of this cartoony bubble art, right? And then you kind of outgrow cartoony bubble art, or, and you have this weird phase around 16 or so where you think you're above that kind of thing. And you're really about this much more intricate art that you see in these other big kid books, right? And so I wanted it to be something, and we discussed it, we wanted it to be something that you would want to go back to, not just if you read it at 12 or 13, but you would feel like you could carry it around at 17 or 25 or 40, because those well-loved books, a lot of the classic well-loved books that come back over and over again, if you go back and you look at like Alice in Wonderland, one of the things about Alice in Wonderland is that Lewis Carroll did very detailed drawings in Alice in Wonderland, right? We all know what the White Rabbit looks like. We know what Alice looks like. We all have that iconic image in our head. But we have that image in our head because it was very intricate. Oh, we are at the we're good morning.
Or are we at time already? Okay.
Yeah.
Let's move forward just a teeny bit. I wanted to make sure that we got a chance to talk about all of these.
Yep, we did.
We did?
Yep.
Oh, I thought there was another piece. All right. Okay. Well, great. Yay.
Yay!
Since we are going to we're going to segue to audience questions in a moment. But was there any last thing that you wanted to point out about the book, about the release, about the artist, anything?
I want to point out that the other reason we went for full color is because, again, the more visual a learner, this book is really for people, not just people who are really good readers who really love history. It's also for people who maybe don't think they like reading, maybe don't want a wall of text on every page, right? But not being a good reader doesn't mean that you're a bad learner. It just means you're not a good reader. And I wanted this to be a book that was accessible. That is a word I can use. Even if sometimes reading is not your favorite thing to do. We wanted to make sure the pictures were their own story, and it went with the words, but that even if all you wanted to do was sit and look at the pictures, there would be something there for you. So, okay. And we had a really amazing colorist who came in and threw in a clutch at the end. Love my colorist, Sherry.
Okay. All right. So I think at this point we're going to segue to audience questions. Now, there are Strand employees circulating with...
There's one, but yeah.
Well, there is a Strand employee circulating with a microphone, but because we're recording this, and be aware that you are being recorded, it's not necessarily going to be put all over the internet or anything like that, but, it's just be aware of that. Where is this going to be on?
You can find this and all of our events on our Strand YouTube.
Okay, well, there you go. So do be aware that you're being recorded, but also make sure that you speak into the microphone, because otherwise it becomes difficult for people to hear what the question is. And even though we all think that we have like outside voices, not all of us actually do. All right, so let's start questions.
Don't
Hands
be shy. I will come out there and make you ask questions.
Oh my, okay. I see a hand here, and then one back there. Okay.
Could you tell us about how you designed your narrator, and maybe about how you designed what she or they look like as well?
So Guide, the AI, there's this joke where people will say they don't care about race because they don't care if the person is purple or green. And I wanted to put a purple character on the page, and I wanted to make it very clear that the only way something could be purple was if it wasn't human. But also I wanted Guide to be sort of an androgynous. Anyone can sort of see Guide in whatever vein you do, because Guide becomes whatever they need to. Guide is a genderless character, okay? And when we were talking about it, we wanted Guide to feel like every teacher that you liked, right? The ones that really made an impression, but also to kind of feel like an approachable teacher, not like, the one that made you miserable in 4th grade, made you stand in the corner holding books, right? So Guide is that. Guide is the teacher that gave you the truth, sometimes in some sharp, pithy answers, but also was really the one that you remember and go back to in your head as the good teacher.
Okay. There was a question over here.
Hi, can you talk about your decision to make this a visual story? And when you're writing other stories, how do you decide that there needs to be visuals or don't, like in your upcoming books? How do you know that they don't need the accompanying pictures?
So for me, I sometimes don't know until I start writing whether it's going to work. I have a very busy Where's Waldo-esque brain in here. I'm going to admit it. And some things I could explain on the page, but by the time I'm done explaining, you're tired of looking at the page, right? Like, so if you've ever read Tolkien, I know someone is going to throw rocks at me, but that like 12-page description of the hills, right? That is not a thing I ever feel like I should put on a page. I don't want to be bludgeoned by a writing teacher who will literally resurrect herself from the grave if I do that. And so when you find yourself, for me, when you find yourself needing 4 pages to describe the setting, this might be time for a graphic novel. I also just love graphic novels and feel like they are the future and we could just embrace them now. Just go ahead, embrace them, because there's not a reason not to. Enjoy looking at the things, reread the things, learn from the things. We could make this fun for everyone.
Okay. The question in the back, last row. Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
What was the most, there are so many surprising things that people don't know about history, but what was the most surprising thing for you writing this book, and what was the most surprising thing for you reading it?
The most surprising thing for me writing this book was how often we actually get to quote unquote golden ages where women are leaders, and then it's ruined by men who decide that she's not a good leader, and then those men end up dead. So there's a king, Nicephorus, in the book. Spoiler alert, the fall of Rome was not complete. Nicephorus helpfully deposed the queen who had held Eastern Rome together, and then his head ended up a drinking cup. So perhaps you should make choices that are different. I know someone's going to say not all men, and you're right, not all men.
Not all men end up as drinking cups, no.
Right, not all men end up as drinking cups. But the ones who screwed up down through history sometimes really screwed up. War is bad, okay, but also if someone says we can't win this fight, sometimes even if she has breasts, she knows what she's talking about. Her head, she gets to retire. Her head does not wind up a drinking cup. I'm just saying.
Okay. Let's get some questions from this side of the room. I see one here in the front row. Okay.
Hi. Who was your favorite
I didn't answer my
person
app.
that you wrote about? And was there anyone you wanted to write about but didn't have the space for?
So many people I wanted to write about. There was a lovely conversation with Caitlin, who was my editor, that essentially amounted to we have this number of pages. We can expand to this number of pages. Everything after that is a different book. I still have that email. It was a lovely email. But I think one of my favorite people to write about, honestly, was Harriet Tubman, because she had such an amazing life. And I knew some of it, but you know how you think you know? I knew she had been a spy. I didn't know that she went on to found this home and all of these other things. And I couldn't put all of her history in there. But she literally helps fight for the end of slavery, and then goes on to fight for women's rights, and then goes on to see to it that indigent former enslaved people had a safe place to go. It is an amazing lifespan. And, you know, I know that there's a movie. Don't ask me about the movie because I'll start ranting. It's wrong historically. I'm sorry, I just had to say that. But her life was unbelievable. She contributed so much to America. And we really don't see, we see tiny slivers of it.
The stunning thing is that there hasn't been a movie till now. That's the thing I'm still trying to wrap my head around.
Right.
Yeah. And I belatedly did not answer the second half of your question. My apologies. The most surprising thing for me was realizing I actually genuinely enjoyed this book. When I had been thinking, no, not like that. I had been thinking this was aimed at kids, so it would be a chore to read for me, my cynical 47-year-old self. And I genuinely enjoyed it. So, thank you.
She's a heifer.
I just said thank you and I praised you. This is how she treats me. What the hell? All right, anyway.
You led with, I thought it was going to be a chore, though. Like, you led with that.
Yes. And then I segued.
Yes.
Okay. Let's move on to audience questions again.
I love my heifer.
All day, every day. This is what it's like. Okay. We have questions here and then here. Okay, and then there, right next to the second person.
Hi, thank you.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm very good.
Good. So about it being a children's book, I'm curious what your target age audience is. And then in relation to that, I'm curious about the choices you made with like some of the horror of this history and how like terrible things can be and making it appropriate.
So I liken it to a PG-13 movie. Really appropriate for almost all ages. Parents may want to sit and discuss. But I'm going to say a hard thing now. Terrible things happen to children. Terrible things happen to children before they ever reach double digits, and their lives go on afterwards. And I didn't want to call the history out or call those things out, because I know that for as hard as some people may find it to know that their kid has this information and wants to discuss it, there are a lot of kids who these things are happening in their lives and they feel alone. And there is something to be said for knowing that somebody else went through it and survived it.
Next question was here. Where's the, thank you.
Erin's got it.
She's just making sure.
Have you ever seen the classic Black history comic books that were done like in the 70s? And did you have anything like from that influence you?
So I had a couple of them in the house growing up. I was born in 76. And yes, but no. I did not love, apparently, the art that I remember. But I did love seeing history that way. I think possibly if I'd had more of those comics, I might have liked history better. I remember reading the couple that were in the house and some other comics. I had one of those like illustrated Bibles, that kind of stuff. I remember enjoying those things. But then when I started looking for things like them that covered more comprehensive history or anything else, really, it was a little more difficult to find. There's some things you can find, but a lot of of nonfiction graphic is aimed specifically at adults. And so it's like, okay, well, this is cool, but what about something that's accessible to the younger set? And so that was what I wanted to kind of create, that feeling. Do you remember the encyclopedias in the grocery store? So that's what this is kind of my homage to. The grocery store encyclopedia that you really wanted. Okay, maybe I was just me. I was a nerd.
No, they did that. I saw that throughout my childhood too. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Does everybody know what the grocery store encyclopedia is? Okay. I see some younger folks in here. So do you want to explain? I'm sorry? Oh, okay. Well,
so there used to be these sets of encyclopedias. They were in the grocery store. You could buy them with stamps. How many of you remember the little golden seal and like green book stamps? I'm super dating myself, but it was a thing in grocery stores. The stamps were like a discount. And so you would get dishes, other stuff with these stamps. Well, the encyclopedia set was 12 books. And for kids, this was the most accessible way to learn stuff at that point. They had pictures, there was lots of definitions, and they were easier than real encyclopedias. They were also cheaper. So I was, or maybe it was 26, actually. I'm trying to remember. There were two different kinds, depending on which grocery store chain you went to. One had 26 books, one had like 12 books. If you were a kid who was a nerd, which was me, you wanted all of those books. The completionist set was important. However, I want to say they were like 300 stamps or something crazy per book, or maybe it was 100. And so your adult persons in your house would have other things they wanted to use those stamps for. So you were trying to hoard the stamps, whatever share of stamps you could get out of grandma and whoever else. If they all shopped at the same store and you could get a few stamps from everybody, you got more books.
I actually had a different grocery store encyclopedia experience.
Oh.
Yeah, when I was growing up, the set of World Book encyclopedias was offered through the grocery store, and you would, like, if you built up enough stamps, you would get one. But these were not like special encyclopedias; they were adult encyclopedias, and it was a way for poor families to collect the whole set.
Oh, I know the one that I know that there was that chain was here too.
Oh, okay.
So we had that.
I think it was A&P.
Yeah. So A&P had that, and then what is now Jules, Albertsons, had a different one. I think it was a competition thing.
Yeah, like my grandmother had collected the whole set of World Book encyclopedias, but she had done that over years of buying groceries. And this was a way for poor families that otherwise a whole set of encyclopedias was hundreds of dollars. Folks couldn't afford that, but they could afford to buy groceries every week and make sure that they got the next volume. And so this was pre-Wikipedia and all that, so yeah.
Yeah.
All right, there was another question here, and then how much time do we have left?
Yeah, 5-10 minutes.
Okay, we can do another set. Great.
Hi, just quickly, I noticed in the panel about Sappho and the panel about Ma Rainey and the panel about it's not widely known that Jane Addams was a lesbian, but she was definitely in a romantic relationship with a woman later in her life. You seem to be not, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm curious why you made the choice to say that Sappho's sexuality was unknown, and why. I'm curious just to know the background of those choices.
So one of the things is that I didn't want to retroactively assign identity. If I could find confirmation, right? It was a little easier with Ma Rainey. She'd carried on public relationships. It was less so with Sappho. I found 37 historians arguing about what the relationship meaning was. And I was like, okay, what am I going to do here? And so sometimes decisions were made so that people would go and look and make their own decision. Because one of the things, especially when you start getting into some of the gender and sexuality stuff, we really don't know that what their construct of their sexuality was. We know what our posthumous construct of their sexuality might be. And I was I don't want to make someone's decisions for them even if they're gone. So I wanted to leave the door open because I also know that my audience is going to be kids who are questioning and trying to decide. And you don't always know if someone was a lesbian or they were bisexual or they were asexual. You know that they carried on very close relationships with various genders. Then you kind of have to leave the door open for it to be like, well, figure it out if you can, which I know is an awkward thing, but I was like, confirmation is easier than making it up as we go along. And I didn't want to become the person later in history when they were like how I said, we had found the Amazons, but we decided they were men. I did not want to go down in history as the historian who said, yes, that is definitive and be wrong. I wanted it to be open to whatever the interpretation might be because I found more than one interpretation. And I wasn't sure. It wasn't even an arguably concrete thing. For Sappho, we believe, but then there's a whole contradictory narrative. I suspect that it was not as concrete, right? I think we mostly are looking at people who made decisions in the moment based on the person and their life. And then we have a lot of historians in between who decide what history passes through. It's kind of like the Bible. Some things we let through and some things we decide, yes, no. There's an entire period in the 1900s where Sappho was given an awful set of descriptions that makes her basically a pedophile. And I'm pretty sure that that is 100% wrong. But it's, right. But it's like, okay, this scholarship is not good. I don't want to pass on bad scholarship. So does that make sense? Okay. I was nervous. I was like, did I screw up really bad? I was trying not to screw up.
Also not the person to accuse you of screwing up really bad. I didn't want to do a gotcha thing. I just wanted to.
Yeah.
No, it's a good question.
Yeah.
All right. Let's get some other good questions. Hands for the last round. We're running low on time. There's one here, and then one over there. Well, then you should ask your question.
There, so let's do that one.
Ask your question. Live your truth.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, thanks for coming out tonight. I was wondering what your favorite graphic novels are.
So you're gonna laugh. So I really love The Crow. I know I could feel the people giving me the look about The Crow. It's fine, but J.O. Barr did a thing that was very different for the time. I know someone's gonna be like, well, what about Neil Gaiman? And but I am an old school. I really like capes. I really like, you're also gonna laugh, I really like Archie. All right.
Old school Archie or modern?
Old school Archie.
Okay.
Modern Archie is okay, but the art is off for me visually. It is not my Archie. I know the kids love it. I'm not saying they shouldn't. It's just not my Archie. Scooby-Doo, I am possibly a Hanna-Barbera problem. And I love that they now have graphic novels. So I like to read really. Have you all seen the Scooby-Doo Apocalypse? Yes. Yeah, no. So this, yes. Oh my God, Scooby-Doo Apocalypse is the best. Oh, the best. The last volume should be out.
We can discuss this afterwards,
yes.
But okay.
Yes, with monsters. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's Velma's fault.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Something to read later.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh. All right. And there was a question here. Wait, hold on.
I just wanted to ask about the book that you said you worked on with Rapunzel as a cannibal.
So, I have forgotten the name of that anthology off the top of my head. Okay. It is with the Columbia Spitball Comics. Columbus College of Art and Design. They do a student anthology as their senior project. And I had a 5-page short that Astor drew, in which, for reasons, I decided that Rapunzel was actually a plant monster, siren, luring Princess in. And then his mother's captain of the guard, while calling him an idiot the entire way, comes to rescue him, knock the spell off of him, and burn down the tower with explosive arrows, because I have a lot going on in here. Okay. There's a lot that happens in here. Sorry. So yeah.
Okay. All right. As one does.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Are we running low on time? We are running low on time, but do we have one more question maybe? Okay, in the very back.
Was there any one history book or source that either really inspired you, or was that the one you used the most?
Unfortunately, no. Historians don't agree on anything. And so you spend a lot of time, really, you get to certain classics history and you're like, you're arguing with each other. Do you know that you're fighting? Like, she knows. She's thinking it right now. Yeah. And they have these really intricate fights about minutia, especially in classics. And so at a certain point in classics, I was like, well, I'm going to go with the thing that sounds the closest to reasonable and cross my fingers and hope I picked well. And then I loved transcripts. The Library of Congress has a lot of transcripts of meetings and things. Your meeting notes should go to the Library of Congress when you were doing a thing. Yes, please send them there, because then I can read them. There is a page in one of the early women's suffrage meetings where every word of that text came from the notes from that meeting. And it was funny because our copy editor said, well, all of these things are from this place. And I was like, yes, because that's what they said. I kind of can't change a single word because that's what they said. So yes, I love when you turn your papers over to your library. Please give your papers to your library. Thank you.
Okay, that sounds like a good note to end on. When you die, make sure that you give stuff to the library. Nice cheery ending. Okay, but
I just want the history to be preserved.
Okay.
First person sources are amazing. Please give me more of them.
when you die. Okay. All right. So we are now going to segue to the signing. And those of you, the many of you who have copies, can get your thing John Hancocked over here by Ms. Kendall. And then we will go from there.
Okay.
Thank you all for coming.
Yes. One more round of applause for our speakers.